Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we are going to dive deep into a genuinely fascinating methodology. We're looking at a way of reading the Qur'an not just as some collection of isolated, disconnected stories from the past, but as a meticulously interconnected web of signs. It's a web that is specifically designed to shape, challenge, and ultimately elevate human perception. Basically, we're going to reverse engineer how we process information, layer by layer, directly through the verses of the book. Our goal today? To finally step back and look at the complete, unfiltered picture.
To get started, let's look at a really simple, everyday phonetic pattern interrupt in the English language to completely shift how you perceive information. Think about the words man and woman, and their plurals, men and women. We literally read, say, and hear these words 100 times a day, right? And our inherited mental programming instantly applies a fixed meaning to them. We think of them as completely separate, gendered categories. Our brain just automatically jumps to that conclusion without a second thought. But what happens if we suspend our inherited assumptions for just a second and purely observe the underlying structure?
What's genuinely fascinating here is this shift in awareness. Notice how just isolating that phonetic W sound reveals a hidden structural link right in front of your eyes. Phonetically, you are saying man and then woman. In the plural, men and women. Now, this isn't about dictionary definitions or grammar rules. It's a structural observation that acts like a spark. It forces us to question a really profound psychological pattern. How much do we completely overlook simply because of our inherited assumptions? The reality is, we only see what we're programmed to see.
And this brilliantly illustrates our core challenge today. If our habitual, automated reading completely blinds us to basic phonetic links in our everyday language, how much of our inherited textual understanding blinds us to the actual structural relationships within divine scripture? Think about it. When we open the book, do we see the living, breathing web of relationships, or do we just project the historical assumptions we were handed down by others? The source material we're exploring today takes this exact investigative mindset to break through those assumptions.
So, let's move directly to the scripture and see how this builds. Our source takes this exact mindset and applies it to a very specific verse about Joseph. The complete verse says, "And he raised his parents upon the throne, and they bowed to him in prostration." Now, let's play devil's advocate for a second. Someone reading this with their inherited assumptions would just say, okay, Joseph is a historical figure, he became super powerful in Egypt, and he brought his mom and dad to sit on some fancy wooden chairs, right? But wait, why does the text specifically use this precise phrasing? Why his two parents, instead of the standard expected terms for a mother and a father?
By absolutely refusing to read this merely as an isolated historical family event, the explainer connects the parents and the throne to a much deeper cosmic concept. The text is literally forcing us to ask, what actually is the throne? Who sits on it inside of human perception? This is really about the cosmic concept of lordship and the very sources from which human beings derive their inner authority. It's asking us to look at the dual forces of our creation and how they relate to the ultimate single source of command.
And the crucial point here is how the book maps this out sequentially. Notice the exact progression of divine education laid out in the verses. Step 1, the merciful. Step 2, taught the Qur'an. Step 3, created man. Step 4, taught him expression. Do you see the absolute precision there? The ultimate source, the merciful, is fundamentally and directly connected to teaching before it even mentions the creation of man. It completely reframes human existence. We aren't just random biological beings, we are fundamentally recipients of a divine educational process.
This sequence forces us to completely reevaluate another massive concept that's been hidden in plain sight: the messenger. Now, the immediate programmed assumption, again, the devil's advocate view, might ask, well, isn't the messenger just a specific person from history? You know, a guy who lived and died centuries ago? But this interconnected web of verses completely redefines the concept. It is not just a fixed historical figure. It's an active, continuous, cosmic station of guidance and transmission, a station that is inextricably linked to that very process of divine education we just talked about.
And the verses prove this by showing us exact, deliberate relationships. Look at how the text carefully distinguishes these phrases. On one hand, we have, return it to Allah and the messenger. On the other, come to what Allah revealed and to the messenger. It is never, ever about blind obedience to a human form or elevating a human to some divine status. No way. It is about strict, unyielding alignment with the divine revelation, the book, the truth that the messenger represents. The human being doesn't become the source. The human being is perfectly aligned with what Allah revealed.
But let's be honest, human beings really struggle with this alignment. Which brings us right back to Joseph, standing there in the prison asking a totally pivotal question. Are scattered lords better, or God, the one, the prevailing? This isn't just casual conversation with his cellmates. It perfectly captures a deeply embedded human psychological pattern. We have this profound tendency to fracture one unified truth, one single source of judgment, into multiple conflicting human-made authorities. We actually crave these scattered lords because, frankly, they are way easier for us to manipulate.
This fracturing of a single truth is brilliantly illustrated in the text by the number 12 in the story of Moses. When Moses' people ask for water, a single divine command is given, the rock is struck, and a single source produces exactly 12 different springs. 12 different paths of reception for 12 different tribes. The source is entirely unified, but the human reception is distributed and varied. Now, while this distribution is divine and necessary, it sets the stage for a deeply dangerous human error.
Because what happens next is where the real danger lies. What happens when humans take these different, totally valid paths of reception and, driven by base desires, detach them from the single source? I'll tell you what happens. They turn them into parallel, human-made religious systems. They take the 12 springs and act as if there are 12 different gods. They replace the unified divine judgment with their own scattered, parallel systems of control. The source material maps out this exact psychological pattern of corruption step by step. It starts pure with the divine source. Then comes human reception. But then, the pull of desire kicks in. People literally trade higher revelation for earthly comfort. It's just like how the verses show the Israelites demanding earthly lentils, onions, and garlic instead of the higher divine sustenance they were already receiving. This base desire leads directly to division into scattered lords, the creation of alternative systems, and finally, the ultimate corruption of truth. It's a total behavioral loop.
And this leads us to the ultimate danger identified in this web of verses. Listen to this incredibly precise warning straight from the scripture. They twist their tongues with the book to make you think it is from the book, but it is not from the book. And they say it is from Allah, but it is not from Allah. This is terrifyingly accurate. The corruption doesn't usually happen by people just abandoning the scripture entirely. No, it happens by using the exact aesthetics, the exact vocabulary, and the exact shape of the book to build a fake, human-made system that looks divine, but is fundamentally twisted by human desire. It's like NLP-style framing. The verses about Jesus making a clay bird beautifully and powerfully illustrate this exact warning. On one hand, humans can shape a clay bird. We can build an empty system that mimics the exact shape of religion. We can use all the right holy-sounding words. But at the end of the day, it's just dead clay. On the other hand, we see a bird breathing, living, but only by the permission of God. Humans can create the shape, sure, but only the true connection to the divine source can breathe actual life, truth, and action into it.
So, how do we avoid falling into these empty parallel clay systems? Well, the text safeguards us by mapping a continuous, unbroken timeline of truth. Follow the progression here. The Torah, sent as guidance and light containing the judgment of God. Then the Injil, continuing and confirming that exact truth. And finally, the book, acting as the ultimate criterion and safeguard over it all. It is not some fractured history of competing tribal religions. It is one unified continuum of divine judgment that we have to align with. But perceiving this unified, living truth, that requires breaking through incredibly thick layers of mental programming. It is exactly like the verses depicting Moses facing the magicians. Think about what the magicians did. They used their craft to manipulate human perception, making dead ropes look like living, moving realities to the human eye. They hijacked the audience's attention. And our inherited dogmas and scattered lords do the exact same thing to our perception today. They present dead illusions as living truth. Which brings us to the staff of Moses. Again, if we drop the inherited Hollywood assumption that this is just a dead, historical piece of wood, what do we actually see in the text? The verses show it as a sign of living action. When commanded by the divine, it doesn't just sit there, it actively swallows up the human-made illusions, the false perceptions, and the twisted logic cast by human magic. It represents the living, active truth that shatters the fake, parallel systems we love to build.
To actually see through these illusions, to witness the interconnected web of signs rather than just the dead clay shapes, the Quran explicitly commands you to actively use your tools of perception. The verses explicitly list them: your hearing, your sight, and your heart. And crucially, the text warns that you, and you alone, are entirely responsible for all three.
You cannot outsource your hearing, your sight, or your heart to a scattered lord, a scholar, or an inherited system. You must engage them directly with the book.
And that brings us to the ultimate provocation of this entire explainer. The text has laid out the methodology, it has shown us the profound danger of twisted tongues and parallel systems, it has shown us the absolute necessity of the living truth and our own personal responsibility. So the final question is this: will you continue to rely on inherited, disconnected fragments of text handed down by others, or will you finally activate your own hearing, sight, and heart to witness the complete living web of the Scripture? Ultimately, the choice of perception is entirely yours.